Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this Central Asia Program online seminar at the George Washington University. Delighted to have you with us today, this morning, to discuss Kazakhstan political reform. And as we were discussing just before, we thought it was really important not to forget about the rest of the world and the rest of the post-Soviet region, and coming back 3-4 months after the January riots, come back to what is happening in Kazakhstan and look at the issues of political reform that was promised by President Tokayev after the riot. And it's really an important aspect, I think, of the transformation of Central Asia globally that is happening currently. And so we have with us a great group of experts that will be able to give us their feedback on how they see this reform process functioning or not functioning. So let me introduce very briefly our speaker. We will first give the floor, and I'm very honored to have with us Maureen Haggard, who is the Office Director at the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor at the US Department of State. We have after her, we will give the floor to Nargis Kassenova, Senior Fellow and Director of the Program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard. Yerkin Tukumov, Director of the Kazakhstan Institute for Strategic Studies, the main think tanks in Kazakhstan. And last but not least, Gavin, Helf, Senior Expert on Central Asia at the US Institute of Peace. I will ask you to keep your remarks only for like a few, no more than 10 minutes, so we have some time for the discussion after. And we will do the discussion via the chat. I will be moderating the discussion, the Q&A moment. So Maureen, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Marlene, for moderating today's event, and for to the Elliott School for making the gathering possible today. I just wanted to offer a few brief opening remarks on behalf of the US Department of State before this very esteemed panel of experts elaborates and helps us all understand better. On a personal note, I did want to start just by thanking the government of Kazakhstan for a very extraordinarily warm and supportive welcome to Undersecretary Uzra Zaya and Special Advisor for International Disability Rights, Sara Minkara, whose trip to Almaty and Nur Sultan I recently joined. We all spent a very productive 4 days meeting with governmental and non-governmental contacts, working to solidify what is already a very strong bilateral relationship. For more than 30 years, the United States has partnered with Kazakhstan to support its democratic development, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. The strength and resilience of the Kazakhstani people and their achievements since 1991 are truly noteworthy. Today, Kazakhstan is viewed and is truly a key US partner, both globally and in the region, where we are very proud to support regional cooperation and enhanced economic prosperity through the C5+1 diplomatic platform. The US-Kazakhstan relationship is a mature one, and one in which we are able to discuss the difficult issues, including law enforcement reforms, security cooperation, human rights, including freedom of religion or belief. We can always count on an open and honest discussion. The United States government strongly supports President Tokayev's political reform agenda, including the new reforms that were just announced on March 16th. We commend the stated aim to strengthen parliament, political parties, and elections in order to promote more political competition and transparency. It's essential that the Kazakhstani people are given a greater choice and a stronger voice in how their country is led. So we're very eager to see concrete progress on these promises. We look forward to further tangible progress and full implementation of these reforms, and we stand ready to assist as a partner in this effort. We encourage the realization of President Tokayev's commitments to end torture in Kazakhstan's jails and prisons, to empower the people's representatives in parliament, to enhance the independence of the judiciary, and to criminalize domestic violence. We also look forward to continuing to work with Kazakhstan in its second term on the UN Human Rights Council. In today's context, it is more important than ever that the Council fulfill its mandate to protect respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, and that it is willing to shine a spotlight on real countries and issues of concern. All UN member states share the same obligation to promote and protect human rights for all. And the United States acknowledges that we have work to do in this area as well. We're not perfect. But what we do underscore is that we are constantly striving to form a more perfect union. And whatever the shortcomings, we firmly hold the belief that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and human rights. So we just encourage everyone to be forthright and to lead on reconciliation and needed reforms. So to end, I would just underscore that the United States looks very much forward to supporting Kazakhstan's efforts to ensure that the January violence is transparently investigated, to supporting efforts to more fully protect, value, integrate members of marginalized and minority communities, including those with disabilities, to supporting greater protection of the respect for freedom of expression and the right of peaceful assembly, and to working with Kazakhstan overall to advance all of these key political and legal reforms. Most of all, I look forward to hearing the discussion today and to learning from the other experts on the line. So I will leave it there and yield the floor to Nargis, I believe.
Thank you very much. So today we're focusing on political reforms in Kazakhstan, and I wanted to go over 3 questions: why, what, and how. And I'll start with why. So why do we have these political reforms? And first and foremost, of course, there is this demand for change that is acknowledged, that has been building up over the years and over the decades. People have all kinds of grievances, discontent with injustices, with the unjust distribution of wealth, with the shortage of the rule of law. And now you hear this kind of criticism everywhere from our top officials, including president, including cabinet members and deputies of the parliament. And it seems to me this full-fledged recognition of problems is one of the top 3 accomplishments of Tokayev's team as of now. And I would add to that also the removal of the family from power and the well-calibrated foreign policy that we've seen. So this demand for change had been there prior to 2019, prior to the resignation of Nursultan Nazarbayev, but I would say it spiked in the aftermath of the resignation because it changed the setting. Instead of 1 president, we had 2, and no matter how much de jure and de facto power Nazarbayev retained post resignation, and how constrained Tokayev was, the transformation of the system started. And there was a lot of thinking among the inside the elites, and as we are told now, the preparations of the coup that we saw in January started 2 years ago. So we're talking about 2020, 2021, and I'm referring to the report by Ayman Umarova at the parliamentary hearings on January events. So the society was waking up as well. And well, in fact, Oyan Kazakhstan, Oyan Kazakh, so sort of wake up Kazakhstan became one of the main slogans, and that became the name of a group of activists that I think our audiences know. And I think we saw the strongest indication of this growing demand for change during the 2019 presidential elections, when many people previously not active in politics joined the process. They became independent election observers, and when many people voted for the alternative candidate Amidst Kassenova, not because he was, very popular or credible as a leader. I think people, well, the government, people in the government were shocked. I think Kassenova himself was shocked by the outcome, but I think it was very, very kind of strong signal from the public. The discontent was also fueled by the difficulties experienced during the pandemic, by the economic trouble. So sort of there was this bottom-up pressure building up. And then during January, in January, we had also an implosion at the top of the political system. And it's interesting to think now what would have happened if we hadn't had that implosion at the top, or if it happened earlier, or if it happened later. But of course, that's now, all hypothetical what the. Now, questions what and how. And we know that President Tokayev outlined a package of political reforms in March, on the 16th March. And these reforms initially, it was planned that they would have been outlined in September, but then they were moved forward to March because of the kind of this recognition of pressures and demand. So, and this address, as we know, was titled New Kazakhstan, Way of Renewal and Modernization. And since then, there have been also some interesting statements and developments, including this week and actually yesterday, there was some interesting developments. Well, for us in United States, it was yesterday on the 26th of April. Of course, in Kazakhstan, that's already different. It was, yes, okay. So, and Zhana Kazakhstan or New Kazakhstan is described by President as effective state and strong civil society, and he put forward the formula: strong president, influential parliament, and accountable government. That outlined some priority reforms, including curtailing presidential powers, and he said that party structures shouldn't merge with the state apparatus, which makes it quite different from like Xi Jinping's China, and for that there should be legal ban on party membership of top officials, including president, members of the Central Election Committee, Constitutional Council, provincial heads, hakims, and the deputies. He said that he would leave the position of the chair of the ruling party, Amanat, and it actually happened yesterday. He mentioned that there should be a ban on the closest relatives of the president, so they shouldn't hold political positions. They shouldn't have the quasi-state sectors. Then he also mentioned focused on reformatting of the parliament and local legislative bodies, improvement of the election system, development of the party system, enhancement of the political competition, strengthening of human rights institutions, enhancing the competitiveness of media, and strengthening of the role of civil society institutions, improvement of the territorial administrative composition of the country, and decentralization of local governance. After that, we had the unveiling of another kind of another concept, the concept of second republic. So now, along with the New Kazakhstan, we have this kind of this second republic concept, and that was. That caused some controversy because, people were saying, is it a second republic? Why do we call it a second republic? Especially given the experiences of the second republic in France, so it was controversial, but it's out there. So we're building the kind of way, having this second republic, and we have this discussion of kind of reformatting of the political system, modernization of the political system, the new social contract in the country. last week on the 22nd of April, we received the draft of the constitutional amendments, and they are pretty much in line with what Tokayev outlined in his 16th of March address. One thing, well, there are quite a few things that would be worth noting and discussing, but let me just mention one, that the status of the first president is confirmed in the constitution, but it seems we hear kind of we get information from like Kassenova and others that it seems that the law itself, the constitutional law on the first president, the leader of the nation, will be removed. So he would retain the status, but it seems that kind of all these incredible powers that were coming with the status would disappear. This week, well, yesterday on the 26th of April, there was this gathering of the ruling Amanat party, during which President Tokayev resigned from the position of the chair of the party, and he talked about political reforms, and also stressed very much kind of the concept of social justice. So I think like the social justice becomes this big theme of reforms, and also the main reason for gathering was the merger of the Adal party with the Amanat party. So I want to finish it with one kind of my last remark would be on what experiences and what lessons shaped this approach to reforms and political modernization that we see now. And here I would point out the Soviet experience and the Chinese experience. Yeah, and we see these references to the Soviet experience in his 16th of March address. Yeah, he mentions negative scenarios similar to Gorbachev's perestroika in the aftermath of January events. He also, and here I'm quoting, talks about the destructive consequences of stagnation, zastoy, that we witnessed in recent Soviet history. And he says that January events were to some extent the consequence of our own domestic stagnation. There is also a book, his book Light and Shadow, that was published in 2019, and these are sort of his memoirs. He goes into great detail describing the kind of this late Soviet period and but particularly, of course, the independence period, and he talks about the collapse of the USSR, and he blames Gorbachev for the chaos he unleashed. Okay, and in contrast, in this book, there is a lot of praise for Chinese leaders, Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin, and he admires their wisdom and statesmanship. So it seems to me that we need to look these are the role models for his political behavior, and I think that helps us understand how he handles reforms and how he handles the Nazarbayev question. So I would end here.
Thank you so much, Nargis, for these great remarks. And I now giving the floor to Yerkin. You're muted, Yerkin.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
First of all, I would like to thank the Central Asia program at George Washington University and you, Marlene Laruelle for organizing this event. And also I would like to say thank you to representative of State Department because of your support. Someone may say that this is minor detail, but in the light of tremendous change inside and outside of Kazakhstan, this support is really important to us. Yeah, and overall, I think it is an excellent opportunity to discuss an important topic. Indeed, profound change are taking place in Kazakhstan now, and President Tokayev continued his course of political modernization. And in his message of March 16, he presented a program of major political reforms. So let me outline the following points. First of all, it's been a long time since Kazakhstan, like other transitional countries, has followed the formula, the economy comes before politics. This course of development in many respects corresponds to Lipset's law, which indicates the correlation between the growth of per capita income and a country's transition to democracy. However, as history has shown, not all nations with a high share of mineral resources in income were able to become sustainable and consistently implement the program of reforms. So therefore, for Kazakhstan now, it is especially important to break its dependence on mineral commodities and move to systematically building solid democratic institutions. Only by relying upon a strong democratic system could we move toward developing a diversified economy. After Kazakhstan got its independence in 1991, its GDP peaked in 2013 at $236 billion. But the political system was still based on super presidential power. The coronavirus pandemic complicated the political transit started in 2019. In 2020, the country's GDP dropped to $171 billion. That year, more than 4.6 million of our citizens needed government assistance. Consequently, in the public domain, the demands and requirements emerged regarding the need for further expansion of the presidential reforms. The event of January 2022 in Kazakhstan became a catalyst for large-scale political reforms. In the aftermath of the tragic events, President Tokayev pointed out the presence of income inequality in Kazakhstan. In particular, he indicated that in Kazakhstan, only 162 people own half the country's wealth. In contrast, half of the population has about $1,300 yearly income. We understand that only an inclusive political system will allow us to build an inclusive economic system. Second, the president reforms that involve lowering the political party registration threshold by 8 times from 40,000 to 5,000, and other liberalization measures have already stimulated the activities of the political parties in the country. Currently in Kazakhstan, 5 political parties are registered, but many experts predict that due to the liberalization of the registration procedures, by the end of the year, new political parties will emerge in Kazakhstan. Consequently, Kazakhstani citizens will have the opportunity to make their voices heard through various political parties. The country's large territory implies that local problems must be solved locally. The centralization of the budget and the decision-making system made it difficult to solve even households in the regions. Following the principle strong regions, strong country, local self-government will be decentralized. Today, there are 2,345 local communities in Kazakhstan. Taxes and other payments began to remain in the local budget. By 2024, it's planned to increase the number of sources of revenues for local government budgets from 6 to 13. So it means that local communities in Kazakhstan will become more autonomous from the center in terms of finance and decision-making. Fourth and lastly, in 2021, 864 hakims or governors were elected, of whom 121 were self-nominated. The call of rural hakims or governors was renewed by about 30%. The current geopolitical turbulence raises many challenges for Kazakhstan. As a result, the need for political reforms within the country is more relevant than ever, and it is in our interest to implement them consistently. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Yerkin, for your comments.
And I'm ready for any questions.
Yeah, we will move to the discussion globally after. And now I would like to give the floor to Gavin.
Thank you, everyone. I don't want to be repetitive of what others had said. I think this is a movie that has three subplots. One is about political transition, one is about economic grievances, and the third is about political reform. And like a good movie, they're going to come together at the end. Political transition in any country, in any type of country, is a potential trigger for violence. I think that's even more true in autocratic regimes. I think one of the good news stories is that the dangerous part of the transition from Nazarbayev to Tokayev has already happened. In the events in January, the forces that were latent and opposed to Tokayev actually taking control showed their cards, they played them, and we're moving to an era in which Tokayev has control of things. The economic grievances, I think one of the good news parts of this is that it seems that the underlying economic grievances that led to the protests in January are manageable, and at least the government in January seemed to feel that they were manageable, which we saw in the initial response. Responding to economic grievance with redressing economic problems, in this case, the price of liquid petroleum gas, show that there are sort of solutions that can cut off grievance and protest when it happens. Another good piece of news is that we didn't see a lot of ideological, what I like to call entrepreneurs of violence, trying to exploit this situation. We did not see broad-scale attempts by nationalists or Islamists to use the protests to promote other kinds of violence. That's actually a good sign. In some other countries, we see any excuse by violence entrepreneurs to exploit the situation being usually taken. The grievances, and both of the previous speakers mentioned this, are about inter-regional and intra-regional inequality. The inequality between different geographic parts of the country and the inequality between rich and poor. These are things that can be addressed, and to the extent that economic reforms are able to address them, they're also able to address those underlying economic grievances. I think the cautionary part here, and it's the only mention I'll make of the Ukraine issue, is that all of those economic grievances, all of those economic problems are made harder by the impact of sanctions, by the impact of Russian economic collapse, and could make the situation more difficult to address using economic tools. Now on political reform, parties, judiciary, decentralization, more inclusive civil society, more inclusive media, all of those things have been addressed to a certain extent in the reforms that have been put forward, and that's something that we can talk about in the Q&A session. I think the temptation here is following through on political reforms versus the temptation to use old tools in ways that undermine political reform. So we've already seen with the, since January in the judiciary, targeted use of the judiciary to address supporters of Nazarbayev. We've seen in the media and in public discourse in civil society an attempt to control the narrative on what's going on in Ukraine. So I think there is a temptation, as you do political reforms, to revert to those old leverage points, those old tools of power that will undermine it. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about we have seen defamiliization in the form of attempts to remove the control that the Nazarbayev family had over politics and economics. But there's still, when you think about constitutional reform and political reforms, a transition problem. We will face the same problem in the next transition. And transition problems like this will not be solved until there are formalized rules that are actually implemented. And that's a very difficult thing to do. We've seen that in the difficulty of Kyrgyzstan trying to implement regularized transition through elections. It didn't work. They had won. We've seen it in the United States, in our own case, hundreds of years after our Constitution was written. So the transition problem continues. And finally, I think both of the previous speakers mentioned the problem of sequencing. If you look back at the revolution in Kyrgyzstan in 2010, if you look at President Mirziyoyev in Uzbekistan, or even if you go back to, as Nargis said, Gorbachev and Perestroika in the mid-1980s, sequencing of these things is very important. If you give a political reform response to economic grievance problems, you may not actually solve the economic problem, and you may create more political problems that you weren't expecting. So it's a very delicate game to play. So, I think for us looking forward, we have to keep an eye on how well those economic parts of the reform agenda are actually addressing the economic grievances across the country that are being expressed. And we have to see the extent to which the president's and the people he's working through are able to keep those political reforms actually moving forward, and the extent to which they're able to avoid trying to use the levers of power in the judiciary, through parties, through civil society, through the media, for more immediate tactical gains. So sequencing is very important. So I'll leave it at that, and I think that probably begs a lot of interesting questions.
Well, thank you so much for these great remarks. And yeah, I can see questions are arriving in the chat. So let's now open the floor. We have like 25 minutes for the Q&A. So it's really great to have so much time for feedback. One of the first questions I see from our colleagues, Pauline Jones, is about the demands that was made by the protester in January for local election for Akim. So is that a reform that is planned by the Tokayev administration? Pauline is saying that she has not seen it mentioned in official remarks. Would you have some updates on this local election for Akim? Yerkin, Nargis, Gavin? Yeah, Nargis.
Well, how local? So basically the idea is to what we saw in his proposals, and now we see in these amendments to the constitution, is the change in the procedure for the appointment of the governors of districts and cities, main cities, and they are appointed by the president, but kind of the new proposed procedure is to have that the president proposes two alternative candidates to the maslihats, and then maslihats, elect one out of them. So kind of alternative elections, right? Mechanism is introduced. As far as I know, and Yerkin, please correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have a procedure kind of outlined for the kind of local, at the lower levels of, for the appointment election of Akims at the lower level, but Tokayev did talk about the decentralization, about the kind of strengthening of local self-governance, and that the people in places should have more power right? They should be able to make decisions. So I think we will see kind of this local self-governance reform, and I think very importantly, he talked about the change in the kind of in the budgeting, so that the money will go to the kind of so basically this local maslihats will have actually the budget to decide on, because you can make all kinds of decisions, but if you don't have the budget, you don't have really the power. So I think we will see that, more of that.
I mean, it's important to remember also, as Nargis said, the decentralization of responsibility without decentralization of authority and finances leads to a lot of frustration and renaming streets. So, that's not terribly helpful. The other thing to bear in mind is that decentralization of politics that is bottom up instead of top down, also releases new kinds of grievance. If you don't really address those inter-regional disparities, you're going to elect people who are calling for radical redistribution, or in rich places, we saw this certainly at the end of the Soviet Union, the donor regions may decide that they want to keep more of their resources instead of supporting those bums in the provinces. So decentralization again is something that is very politically potentially explosive.
I can add shortly. I totally agree with previous speaker, because we are on a way to find a balance between uncontrolled decentralization with negative outcomes and super presidential structure, what we use it to have. And I just add to what Nargis said, to what Nargis already mentioned, that we basically have two levels of hakims, local hakims, it's counties. I can compare with counties and states governors. So at the bottom level, or at the counties, we already have, they already elected, or there is a choice of election. But at the state level, there is they are appointed by president. But we are on the way to change this law from 2023, when regional hakims or these state governors will also be elected by direct vote. And it is very important to what Nargis already mentioned about budget, about the number of sources of revenues for local government budgets, that it's going to raise from 6 to 13, what I already mentioned in my report.
Beautiful, thank you so much. We have another question from our colleague William Courtney, asking what are the prospects for an independent investigation of the January violence and for holding to account those responsible. Of course, that's a pretty sensitive question, and I think things are still going on in terms of investigation, but what about an independent investigation? Nargis, would you like to begin again?
Yeah, I think Yerkin is on the ground there. Maybe he can start and
yes,
continue.
Yerkin, so we would welcome your feedback. You're muted.
The investigation is still in progress. You mentioned it, it's right. I just can quote some numbers of what I have, if you're really interested. So the representative of the General Prosecutor's Office provided the following information. There is a lot of this information. The courts have reviewed 9,317 administrative cases related to the January events. Almost half of the considered cases did not receive any practical punishment. 1,149% have been released from custody without any penalty. 3,314 people were sentenced to administrative detention. 196% committed thefts. 39 are suspected of illicit armed trafficking. 3 are related to robberies, 3 to theft of cars, and 3 to petty theft.
Well, I think it's giving us already a kind of broad idea of
there are a lot of such raw information. I can quote from the official information, and I'm wondering what kind of help this provide you by assessing the January events.
Thank you.
I mentioned the hearing that we had in the parliament, and there was a lot of interesting information there. And I mentioned this kind of the Ayman Umarova's report, in which she talks about these 2 years of preparation, for the coup, and all these problems will be like really understatement, in the security services, KNB, and so on and so forth. I think we will get something close to truth. I don't think we'll receive like 100% truth, because probably a lot, like a lot was happening at the very, very top. So, but I think there should be continued pressure for kind of for learning the truth, first and foremost from inside Kazakhstan.
I think that I can add that this is in our interest, in the interest of government, to provide transparent and true investigation based on some confirmed cases of any cases. I can just add that in total, more than 1,600 small and medium enterprises have experienced the losses of the amount of over 38 billion tenge. So it's about $200 million, something. Yeah.
Thank you. So there are a lot of discussion. Yeah, Gavin. Sorry.
Quickly on this, I don't see a political downside for Tokayev to be open about what happened, find people who are responsible, maybe because he's got to walk back some of the original statements about this being caused by 22,000 well-trained terrorists and these sorts of things that were coming out originally. I think he only has the possibility of gaining legitimacy and credibility if he actually makes this process open and clean.
Thank you. And as you can see, there have been a lot of discussion in the chat, a very active discussion coming from some of our Kazakh attendees about the issue of the investigation and the fact that there have been reported cases of torture. But I see two questions that maybe can be related to that. One is about the prospect. What are the prospects for an independent judiciary to emerge? And I think that's a key element of any kind of genuine political reform. And then another one is about how the US can be helping Kazakhstan to face the situation of being partly also sanctioned or being a kind of collateral victim of the political and financial sanction on Russia. So if we could address these two questions first, and then there will be other coming on.
So as a former democracy and governance advisor for USAID and someone who spent a lot of time Trying to make independent the judiciary branches of a lot of countries. I think, George, this is an unusually difficult task. It's especially difficult in a super presidential administration because, as I was saying before, the temptation to use what they call telefonia prava, or the telephone justice by members of the presidential administration or members of the government in cases where they are exercised about some particular issue, they can always pick up the phone and they can always call. I think one of the things with Kazakhstan over the last few decades and looking forward is the depoliticization of everyday justice, of everyday use of the court. So, it's very hard for a judge or the Supreme Court to ignore when the president calls and says, I need this journalist, put away. But the question of, what kind of justice do you get if you are pulled over by the traffic police? What kind of justice do you get in commercial relationships? Kazakhstan has gone a long way over the last few decades to depoliticize the non-political parts of the judicial system. The real hard part is, when you want to pick up the phone and make that phone call about a human rights activist or a journalist that you don't like, how do you not do that? There are institutional parts of this, creating a judicial branch that is self-regulating, an advocatura, a legal profession that is self-regulating, financial independence of the courts, all of these things. But in the end, it has to do with the political will of the executive branch to not misuse the judicial branch when that would be very much in their favor and solve a problem for them easily.
Nargis?
Well, yeah, well, absolutely. And I think that the challenge is just so immense, and it doesn't seem to be kind of the judicial reform is not kind of among the priorities outlined at the moment. And I think the way I understand it, in terms of sequencing, the idea is to focus now on the constitution, on the change of the constitutional, basically setting and constitutional rights. So the one of the amendments is to create the constitutional court. So we have a constitutional council. So actually to turn constitutional council into constitutional court, which would be which is a good development, I think, and then you are, then there is kind of the position of the ombudsman for human rights, and this ombudsman will have certain powers, and that's all outlined in this proposed amendment. So kind of starting with that, kind of defining the rights, defining the relations between, president, parliament, the Senate, and majorities, and so kind of the fundamentals. And I guess judicial reform would be at somewhere the next stage. But I think there is understanding that something should be done. And for me, it was an interesting piece of information that. In the Astana International Finance Center, they have the court which is using the common law, right? So the British law, and that's sort of a quick fix to the problem we have with the judiciary, so that investors can benefit from this kind of better regime. And now the same is planned for the Gate City. So the Gate City is this plan of 4 satellite cities near Almaty, and they want to make it like as a magnet for investments. And it's reported that also kind of there is a plan to use this common law there. So kind of there is an understanding that we do have a problem, but as Gavin said, it's the challenge is immense, but you want investments now, so kind of you're introducing the kind of you importing importing the system, which is very controversial, which is quite controversial.
Thank you. And we have maybe related also, or indirectly related to that, a question about to what extent does the bureaucracy have the capacity and willingness to implement difficult economic reforms in the face of oligarchic vested interest. And here also, I think that's one of the key questions, like the independence of the judiciary, about at least having the economic reform side moving forward. Anyone who would like to tackle the, yes.
Can I add that it's hard to imagine that even 1 year ago that I would be sitting here as a director of the Kazakhstan Institute for Strategic Studies under the president and discuss such topics as about political modernization, about drawbacks of our judicial system. But the factor that I'm sitting here and discussing such questions, such issues, this is also a sign of the beginning of political transformation in Kazakhstan. Frankly speaking, I hold this position since end of January, and I moved from Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the director of Kazakhstan Institute for Strategic Studies. And the only reason why I took this position, because I clearly see the opportunity to help my country in this serious and important period of Kazakhstan. And I can just add to the judicial system that, of course, our judicial system should be reformed in very serious way. We are at the beginning of this process. We fully understand this, a lot of challenges facing our system. And I just add that there should be some opposition from oligarchs, some oligarch groups to postpone or delay the political reforms. But I think and I believe that our presidential system and Mr. Tokayev is strong enough to oppose any of this action from oligarchs.
Thanks. So the discussion is continuing on the chat with a lot of people commenting on human rights abuse in relations to protesters. So I invite you to have a look at the discussion going on there. Maybe as we have like 6 minutes left, I wanted to kind of bring the big elephants in the room that have been also going on the discussion, which is the current war in Ukraine and Russia situation, and what does that mean for Kazakhstan. And maybe here what would be interesting is not to discuss Kazakhstan kind of positioning toward Russia in foreign policy, but how the kind of the repression going on Russia can also put pressure on Kazakhstan domestically. So if we could just I would like to give you the floor for our last round of like two minutes each to maybe comment on what is happening in Russia itself, even maybe more than the war itself, how it can reflect or not reflect on the domestic political landscape in Kazakhstan. Gavin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, if we rewind 6 months, Putin was invincible. Nazarbayev and Tokayev had a transition in place that was, orderly, not, familial and dynastic. We were talking about maybe Putin would be looking at the Kazakhstan model of transition as a model for something other than, having an adult son to give it to. And, we've seen that catastrophically change. And I think there was a moment, I remember, when Tokayev invited the CSTO in, when he started trying to talk about this being from external terrorists, provocation, where he started to look like he was folding into a Russia-Belarus, repression and false realities, and finding a way that drew him closer to that. One of the things that I think has happened with the catastrophic failure that Russia is experiencing in Ukraine is that, and the fact that both the United States and Russia seem to be trying to pull Central Asian countries, away from a multi-vector balanced policy towards each other, is that Tokayev very much has turned away from a Lukashenko variant of how to deal with domestic struggles. I mean, that was available. That was there in January. I think that's not available now. And I think, he has very much signaled that he's going to try a different approach than what Lukashenko did in a similar situation. And I like to say this, and I've been saying it since January, I think we should give Tokayev as much of the benefit of the doubt in moving forward with political reforms as we gave to Mirziyoyev in Uzbekistan a few years ago, which is we should really encourage follow through on these things and keep a firm eye on it.
Thanks. And Nargis and Yerkin, very briefly.
Well, I fully agree with what Gavin said, and well, as we already said, I think the reform agenda is incredibly challenging. But I think what happened in Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the war, of course it creates a lot of problems, a lot of challenges. But I think I think it also facilitates reforms because it's sort of what's happening with Russia is just such an epic fail. It really discredits this type of regime, and it's sort of it helps to break away from the model. I think, you don't want to be like that, right? And also, I think it would help to for our elites, to decouple from the Russian elites, so from our system, political economic system, to decouple from the Russian political economic system. And I think that's huge. If this happens, then we do have kind of some chance for a brighter future, because we always had these connections and sort of kind of one system, right, underpinning our sovereign states. So it's so just clear that we need to change and not to become like that and become something else. That would be my take on the situation.
Yerkin, last comment.
Can I abstain from this question, because this is out of our
topic? Absolutely, no problem on that. We do understand. Well, I wanted to thank you, all of you, for the great discussion. And you can see the chat is having its own dynamic this time, with a lot of comments coming on the side of some of our Kazakh participants. And we thank them for sharing this information and bring that to our attention. Thank you all so much. I'm sure it's not the last time we will be discussing that, and we are very much in a very dynamic influx situation, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that collective discussion on what is happening in Kazakhstan, both domestically and in the regional context. So I wanted to thank you, all of you, for being with us today, and hope to see you very soon for other events. Thank you.
Thank you very much.